Joining us now in our book talk segment, great to welcome a woman who's written a book. It's a novel, but it's kind of based on fact. We'll find out about it. It's called Death in Vegas, all about boxing, and an interesting novel about what happens in the ring and outside the ring. We're joined today by Dr. Margaret Goodman, who is also a physician. She's a neurologist out there, also did a lot of work in covering of boxing, and she joined us by telephone from Las Vegas today. And Doctor, good to have you with us. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, good to have a chance to chat with you a few minutes. We talked before we went on about Las Vegas a bit. That is the home of one of its homes for is boxing over the years. So when I was out there in September, they had a big fight then, and that's the place to have it.
Certainly still is, believe it or not.
Yeah, they had it at the MGM, and I was amazed how many people just kind of descended into that town that Saturday. So it always had it going back to, I guess, the Muhammad Ali years, and maybe a little bit before that, but it still has it, doesn't it?
You know, it certainly is. I would say that probably boxing brings in as many people as anything. Maybe not quite as much as the rodeo that's here this week, but they have the NFR, the National Finals Rodeo, here in December, and
Right.
That brings in just thousands and thousands of people. But boxing also brings in a fair amount throughout the year.
Yeah, I've been out there during the rodeo time, too. You're right. You see a lot of the folks wearing the cowboy hats for a week.
Very true, very true. They're all over the place.
Well, you not only are a physician, and you've probably treated a lot of people in boxing, but you've worked ringside, you've covered the sport, so I guess that led you to write a novel about it. You had a lot of stories, I'm sure, that you incorporated in the book.
That's very true. Obviously, the book is fiction, but I started working in boxing in 1993 when I did some consultations on, like, George Foreman, some other fighters that needed neurological exams, and very soon after that, I started to train as a ring physician. I was a handful, and actually was still a handful of female ring physicians around the world. There's not too many, believe it or not. Obviously not a lot of female referees in the sport, but definitely not a lot of ringside doctors. And during that time, I worked between 1994 to 2005. I worked probably over 500 fight cards, including with Lennox Lewis and Mike Tyson, Manny Pacquiao, Floyd Mayweather. So I had a great deal of experience, and I also worked with the Medical Advisory Board. I was chairman of that in this state, and what we did with that was we set medical standards, testing for the fighters before they fought, determining their fitness to compete.
I was going to say, your job, not only if something happens in the ring to test both fighters, but before they get in, you I don't know if you do it or somebody has to do it. Does the ringside physician do it for that fight, the two fighters before the fight as well?
Yes, we always did exams, usually about 24 hours before the fight. We would do a pre-fight exam, which was very cursory. You didn't really get to spend much time, but it gave you an opportunity to see how the athlete talked and walked and balanced themselves so that you could make a decision on whether or not you wanted to recommend a fight stop, depending on what was happening during the action that subsequent night. So it kind of gave you a good background. And when I left being a ringside physician in 2005 and Medical Advisory Board chairman for the state in 2007, I really wanted to discuss a lot of the issues that still plagued the sport. I think that people, you know, when you read a book on boxing or you watch a movie, it's really from the point of view of the fighter. I mean, that's what gets you to watch.
Sure.
But behind the scenes actually is very interesting as far as how politics is involved, how the casino industry is involved in some jurisdictions, how the fighters are declared fit to box, what happens during a fight from the physician's perspective and even the judge's perspective. A lot of people don't know. And I think I wanted to help bring more people to the sport. It really is a very romantic sport. It's the ultimate in reality television.
Yeah, you go back to the early part of the 1900s, where in America, boxing and horse racing were the two top sports in the country. So,
you are exactly right. You're right. You're right. And now they both become niche sports for various reasons, some of the similar reasons. And, you know, you mentioned that, and boxing and horse racing or thoroughbred racing are regulated very much the same way.
Right.
In other words, it's not like the NFL or Major League Baseball where there's one organization that oversees it. It's actually regulated on a state-by-state basis. So some commissions in different parts of the United States, for example, may have fighters do MRI studies and electroencephalograms and undergo, stringent medical tests, whereas in other states, some places in the Midwest, and not to say anything negative about the Midwest, the testing can be very limited. In some of those specific jurisdictions where a fighter might just kind of get a pre-fight exam and a yearly exam and get in the ring and never have had an MRI or even an HIV test.
Yeah, you read the stories about some of these boxers that go to a state where they can get a license, and the test is, look at the eye chart. If you can see the chart, you're in. So it's kind of sad.
It is very sad, and plus the fighters deserve a lot more than that. And so I thought putting it in the perspective of a novel would be easier than having me end up at the bottom of Lake Mead by revealing too many things, or next to Jimmy Hoffa, one of those. And I figured it would be better to do it in this way and talk about all the different things that plague the sport, but also probably gives people a new view of the athletes themselves and what a great endeavor it is.
I've started reading the book. I don't read novels all the way through when I interview the authors. I don't want to give away endings, but I'm about halfway through, and it's a great story. But I'll let you kind of give the little elevator speech on the storyline.
That's great. Well, number one, if people like stories about like Erin Brockovich, or if they like The $1 Million Baby, that film, they'll really, really enjoy this. It's a medical suspense novel, and the main character, Olivia Norris, is a neurologist from Chicago. She travels to Las Vegas when her brother Curtis, who's a heavyweight contender, is seriously injured in a high-profile fight. And once she gets out there, she finds out that his injuries may not really completely be from the fight itself. And so in order to find out more, she actually infiltrates the sport as a ring physician and kind of goes on from there to find out what happened to him, and actually falls in love with the sport. But along the way, she tries to do something to help it as well.
Yeah, it's a great setup for a story, and like you said, boxing in itself, the drama is already there, isn't it? Surrounding
it sure is.
The fight.
It sure is. I know. You see these guys on TV, and you don't really appreciate what goes on. I would say probably some of the best experiences I ever had were in the dressing room with the fighter, after they won or after they lost. Some dressing rooms would be very loud and clamoring. Others would be religious, certain kinds of music, and the fighters themselves and how they would respond. And sometimes, you'd feel so sad for an individual when they would lose, because they put so much effort into this. I mean, you can see that when you watch a film like Rocky or $1 Million Baby. And some of them would actually try to make me feel better because I felt so bad for them. So that's another reason why I enjoyed it so much.
Had a chance to actually do some blow-by-blow radio of some boxing down here in our area, Doctor, a few years ago, which was kind of interesting, but you really don't get the feeling of a bout until you're that close to a ring, how hard these guys hit. And like you said, you do feel bad for the guys that lose, because they're taking a beating.
They sure do, and you really develop a... I don't know, as a physician, it was very good for me as a neurologist, because, when a neurologist sees somebody with a concussion, and obviously I would see a lot of athletes or people in my private practice, even from accidents, that had suffered a concussion, you don't realize how it actually evolves. And so when you were ringside, you would actually see a concussion happening. Yeah. And so it actually made me a much better neurologist by being right there when something like that would occur. It was a definite plus as far as being able to diagnose someone.
You don't get that impression on TV. You see the guy get hit, but you don't hear it like you do live. It's a whole different thing.
You don't.
Yeah.
You don't. And people are always criticizing the officials, but it is so different when you're right there, sitting there, seeing them right after, and it's a different perspective for the referee that's actually in the ring, too.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the sport as it is today? I know in Vegas it's doing pretty well, but overall, like we talked about before, boxing is kind of on a bit of a downturn, I guess, especially with the UCF fighting, or Ultimate Fighting, whatever they call it. But I would think that would be more dangerous, but I don't know. What do you think?
They're two different sports. I worked a lot of UFC, or Ultimate Fighting Championship fights, when they first came back to the state of Nevada, because they were outlawed here for a number of years. And in some respects, it's safer because there's more ways for an athlete to win. But as I've been watching and seeing what's happening to the athletes, it's just a different kind of injury. There's more orthopedic injuries, but they also suffer brain injuries as well. So it's kind of 51-50 the other. But I think that the main problem with boxing and with combat sports like UFC is the fact that they are state regulated and that there's no uniformity.
Right.
And just like we mentioned earlier, you can be a fighter and like you said, you can go into some places and you just step in the ring, and in other places you have to undergo rigorous testing, and it's really detrimental to the fighters. And often what happens is the people that are promoting the events will take advantage of that fact. And if they know an athlete has specific problems and might not get cleared in a more strict jurisdiction, they'll take them to some place where they don't look at them quite so closely. And that's just wrong, and it's wrong for the athletes themselves, and it's wrong for the sport, and I think it's contributed to the fact that this sport has become more of a niche sport. But, as far as you mentioned on television, I think there's probably more fights on television than there has been in many, many years. So even though the sport itself is plagued by a lot of issues, it still is very prevalent on television, like on HBO and Showtime, and I think somewhat it's coming back to more network TV as well.
Yeah, I know CBS put a couple of fights on not too long ago,
Yep.
and it is coming back to the networks. Years ago, I had a chance to interview a guy that was known for colon boxing, Don Dunphy. I don't know if you knew his name.
Yes, I did know his name, of course.
He lived in Long Island when I was living up there, and got a chance to interview him. He was the voice of boxing for so long, but he'd like to have that again in some way. The Friday night fights, that was a big television show, and radio, I guess.
It's wonderful, and that way you could kind of follow the athletes and kind of get more of an idea about their history and their family and where they came from, and that helps with everything. But the bravery that it takes for a fighter to step in against another one is really amazing when you can see it firsthand.
Yeah, well, one thing I'd like to see, if it ever does come back to that popularity, the heavyweight division. The champions have been in Russia for a long time. We don't even know when they fight. The Klitschko brothers.
I know. That is it's a sad one.
Nothing wrong with the Klitschko brothers, but you'd like to see some Americans get a shot at it.
No, I think you're right, and I think the heavyweight division has really fallen apart a lot, and people sometimes say it's because there's more money they can make in football or endeavors like that, but look what's going on in football as far as safety issues, so who knows, they may be kind of running back to boxing soon, who knows?
That's true, a lot of the athletes, and then again, in the older days, there was kind of guys trying to get out of bad neighborhoods or a life that wasn't going the right way, they got into boxing, so that's where a lot of the fighters came from, right, back then, maybe still today.
True.
Yeah.
There still is a lot of that they, because fighters, as far as boxers as compared to like UFC type guys or MMA guys, they'll start at an early age. Some of them will start at amateur boxing at age 6 to 8, maybe a little bit older than that. You look at someone like Oscar De La Hoya, the Golden Boy. I mean, he started when he was a youngster, as I think around 6 years old,
right.
And then eventually fought in the Golden Gloves and got an Olympic gold medal, and then went on to become a pro. And the rest is history. But that's when boxers are starting, and that's part of the problem. You worry about that from a perspective of chronic brain injury that we're seeing in football and so many other things that are contact sports, or even seeing it in hockey and a lot of the other things. You have to worry about young people starting these endeavors at too young of an age.
I was going to say, is it because some of these athletes are playing it as kids? We're talking about football and maybe the other sport, or is it because people are bigger now than they used to be, stronger?
No, I think that's probably an issue, but starting at too young of an age, recent studies have shown that perhaps anyone below the age of 14 should not be involved in any kind of contact sports, including football, where they could, hit their head. And that we used to assume, and even from a perspective as a neurologist, we used to assume that a young person would do better after concussion, that their brains, as they grow, would regenerate in a way, not specifically as the brain doesn't regenerate like some other areas, but that would happen and so that they would improve. But now we're seeing that children and young adults are more susceptible to concussion and don't do as well following it. And so they need more time off. And so I think that's a lot to be considered in the next few years as to regulations. Everybody's kind of jumping on because they're so nervous now about the issue of concussion and chronic traumatic and stuff. A lot they've that you're seeing so much in the news these days and with the big NFL lawsuits, that I think there's going to be a lot of discussion down the road as to whether or not these sports are good in, junior high, high school going on, because they're finding on autopsy, I don't mean to be gross, but they're finding on autopsy that a lot of these changes in the brain are starting when people are young and not, later in life.
And once you have one concussion, it's easier to get the next one, right? Doesn't it get easier?
You're exactly right.
Easier, but it happens more frequently.
It does. Yeah. It can become additive, and if you get one too soon after you've had one recently, it can actually kill you. There's something called second impact syndrome, and so it just is more important to stress, to take someone out of action, whether it be boxing or UFC or whether it's football or soccer even. I've seen several young soccer players that were NCAA soccer players that suffered a significant amount of concussions. And the other thing that people don't realize is women are even more susceptible than their male counterparts. And so perhaps women need more time off. And there's a lot of reasons for that. For example, with women, it could be because their necks are weaker. One of the most important things you can do to prepare yourself for getting a concussion is to have a strong neck. And women's necks are not nearly as strong as men's.
But there are fewer women football players than boxers, so that's good.
That's true, although there is a women's football team here in Las Vegas. It's an amateur.
I have seen video of that.
Right. Hey, and I bet all those roller skaters around the country, I'm sure they suffer a fair amount of concussions. I know there's a lot of women roller skating teams. And
roller derbies back, right?
Yeah, those roller derbies. I bet you fall down on that and hit your head. You're not going to be doing too well.
No. Well, it's a great book. It features boxing, but behind the scenes as well, and it's called Death in Vegas. We've been talking with Dr. Margaret Goodman today. And Doctor, I know it just kind of came out, but where do you have a website you want to direct people to? They can get the book or get a hold of you?
Yes, definitely. They can get the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's soon going to be on iBooks. And they can also contact me at www.margaretgoodmanauthor.com.
Great. Doctor, appreciate you taking a few minutes. I know you're busy out there, any doctor is, but good luck with the book, and hopefully we can talk to you again down the road. And next time in Vegas, I'll look you up. We'll go to a fight.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me.
If you'd like to order the book we're talking about, please go to DougMilesMedia.com and enter the author's name in the Amazon search box. Thank you for listening. Please come back soon for more conversations here at Doug Miles.